Good morning, it's January 20th, 2022. This is To My Liberal Friends, and I'm John Haddo. Last night on the floor, Schumer made his big gamble, and he failed. He offered the voting rights bill, and it failed to get the necessary 60 votes to end debate. He then used a procedural move by changing his vote to against, and under Senate rules, it gives him the opportunity to recall the bill at a later date. Then he asked a parliamentarian, as a point of order, how many votes it would take to end debate and move to final vote on the bill. The parliamentarian informed him it would take 60 votes. He then offered a motion that would remove the 60-vote threshold for this bill only. The minority could filibuster, but only as long as they held the floor. Once they ceded the floor, the majority could then move the bill with a mere 50 vote plus the VP tiebreaker. This motion failed 52-48, with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema voting no. Now, if you want to hear a well-thought-out discussion of the Senate rule, I would recommend to you to go to the C-SPAN site and listen to Senator John Thune's speech on Wednesday. Now, if we're being honest, all this is not about actual voting. It's really about politics. In 2020, and for the past year, former President Trump has gone around the country denouncing the results and claiming that the election was stolen from him. And like all things, if you say it enough times to enough people, there will be a certain number that believe you. And with this comes angst and doubt over the legitimacy of the electoral process. But I want to be clear, Trump lost in 2020 and he needs to quit saying he did not lose and accept the results. Similarly, Joe Biden and Democrats have pounced on the Georgia election law that was passed. They have called it, quote, Jim Crow 2.0, end quote, and claimed that it would make it difficult for people to vote in Georgia elections. Like Trump, if they say it loud enough and enough times, a certain number of people will begin to believe it. But to anyone who takes the time to read the Georgia election bill, they will find out, as the media fact-checkers have pointed out, that it actually expands the ability to cast your ballot. The Georgia law increases the number of early voting days and makes such polling places remain open on Saturdays and gives the counties the option to keep them open on Sundays. It allows you to request an absentee ballot by mail for any reason. It does require you to offer some form of ID, of which several are available, up to and including your Social Security number, the last 4 digits. But this infuriates Democrats. And I cringe when I hear some liberals try to say that people don't have a Social Security number. With the legislation failing yesterday, Biden in his press conference actually suggested that the results of the 2022 midterm elections might not be legitimate. When asked about this, Biden said, and I quote, "Well, it all depends on whether or not we're able to make the case to the American people that some of this being set up to try to alter the outcomes of the election," end quote. Now, later that day, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki had to once again attempt to clarify what a befuddled president said. And she tweeted out, quote, "Let's be clear. POTUS was not casting doubt on the legitimacy of the 22 election. He was just making the opposite point. In 2020, a record number of voters turned out in the face of a pandemic, and election officials made sure they could vote and have those votes counted." I'm not sure what she's talking about. So go back and read what Biden said. The key is this, quote, "Whether or not we were able to make the case to the American people that some of this being set up to try and alter the outcome of the election," end quote. Doesn't sound like Psaki was describing him, because in other words, if Republicans win, we're going to say they somehow cheated. That's what Biden said. This type of claim is getting old very fast. It got old when Democrats claimed that somehow George W. Bush stole the Florida election by getting the electoral votes from Florida in 2000, even though every recount showed he narrowly won. It's gotten old with Hillary Clinton claiming that voter suppression cost her the 2016 presidential election, and it's certainly, as I've said, become tiresome when Donald Trump continues to bang that drum about the election in 2020. It does not do the country any good for President Biden to now start casting doubt on elections later this year simply because he did not get his way. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.